Peace. My name is G Man of Law. My artist name is P Funk City G. I'd like to welcome you to Rebel Life, and this is the Naked Truth. Today I want to talk about, the process in Jamaica for funerals and dealing with death. I'm also going to cover 10 things Black women need to know to exist in a long-term relationship. And lastly, Black fathers in the home. But first, I just want to take a couple seconds to, thank everybody for the support, their, comments, likes, subscribing, PayPal, and, I appreciate it. I appreciate your time. I take nothing for granted. And, just want you to know that you're appreciated. I do this for, several reasons. Like I said, a lot of people don't have an OG. So I was thinking about changing the name of the show to your favorite OG, you know what I mean? But I'm just going to use that as a call phrase, So a lot of people don't have OG, and, to have elders in our community to give us information and stuff like that is very important. That's how we grow. And we can't be so prideful that we can't, take a lesson or learn a lesson from someone, And that's what happens with pride. We get full of ourselves that we are unable to learn, And opposite of pride is shame. So we have to be able to be shamed to make progress. So pride is a bad thing. It's not a good thing. So, I work to stay away from prideful people and competitive people, because competitive people are always going to have something to prove to you or to themselves, And I've never, got along with, competitive people, because my whole thing is, I'm going to let you win. Go ahead and win the game that you win it. But I'm going to win at something else, you know what I mean? So I don't play, I don't play games. Life is real. If I, play a game or a sport, it's to, for physical, to keep my wind or get something mental out of it, But anyway, with that said, I've had a moving last month, a dear friend of mine, a brother of mine, Daniel Rich. I've spoken to him, about him, numerous of times. We're business partners, and he had to, he had to deal with the situation of losing his dad, his father, recently, within the last month and a half, And I was there for him as much as possible. And it was just a trying time, He buried his father, Mr. McGrowder. Mr. McGrowder is a well-known fixture here in Savile Lamar, Jamaica. He founded the baker at Dunbar River. And everybody know him. His funeral was one of the biggest funerals I've attended. Here in Jamaica. With the amount of people, from all over, all walks of life. And I know he touched me because, he, has a beautiful home. Mini mansion. I wouldn't even, maybe not even a mini mansion, a mansion, And he's a provider, He takes care of the kids and provides opportunity for his kids, and it's amazing to see and amazing to be a part of, also to be a reciprocant of, because, as you know, I'm a music producer, artist, musician, songwriter, engineer. And, my company is, excuse me for 1 second. Yeah, what's up, man? Yeah, but you gonna go late. That's my son. Asking me, if he has, if he's going to school today. But anyway, getting back to Mr. McGrowder, is that I was a recipient of his love. He built or financed the building of one of the nicest studios here the nicest studio that I've been in Jamaica. And we that's where his son Damio Rich and I got to know each other. We worked together. I started working with him as a audio engineer, and and then started producing this project. And he was there. Mr. Crowder was there the whole time. And when I made the transition from engineering to producer, because I had to rebrand myself and reintroduce myself as a producer, because it's a long story, but if someone sees you as an engineer and then you come and tell them you write music and produce and all of that, it's hard for them to visualize it. That's just how the industry works. So if you come into the industry and you want to be a producer, but you're coming in as an engineer, you have to, people only want to see you as an engineer. And the engineer is like, the low man on the totem pole in the process of making records, So anyway, I had stepped away to reintroduce myself. My son was a baby, and I had to, me and his mom separated, and I had him full time, so I had to be mom and dad. I'm not gonna say mom, because what women do, a man really can't do, and they can't be a dad. So, but I did my best to take on the responsibilities of what his mom was doing, cooking, cleaning, bathing, and taking care of all his needs. And and I did that probably till about till he was, I would say, about 6 years old. I had tried and would do sessions occasionally, but I was trying to do vocals and change diapers at the same time, and it just I just had to pull back. So what happened was I taught myself how to engineer. I mean to play music, so that I didn't have to hire musicians to write music. So everything is self-contained. And so anyway, in that process, I would see Mr. McGrowder around town, and he was always, talking about the music and his appreciation for music, and how he was, he couldn't wait for the next opportunity for me and his son Damio Rich to work together. You know what I'm saying? And it just makes me emotional thinking about it now. But he's a great man. He reminds me of my father. My father is a provider. And there's no love like like a black man who's a dad. Like once we become fathers, especially the boys, we become selfless. You know what I mean? Like we pour so much into our well, I'm gonna speak for myself. I pour so much into my son because I want him to be at least, what I am, what I know, and push the boundaries even more. So the pressure not to be better than me, to be different than me, but with the same, coming from the same point of view, the same calibration. And that's how Damien Rich is with, from his dad, and and instill into his boys. Has an amazing family, daughters and sons, But, one thing about the McGrowders is that there has to be about 100 people that he helps, you know what I mean? Like, from working for him, taking care of his property or, loved ones. He's just an amazing man. And I'm gonna do a video on my next week. I'll do something on, does black unity still exist? And from my point of view, it's stronger than ever to see how black people create opportunities for our family. I'm a recipient of that. My family has helped me, transition here in Jamaica and get by. I've helped them, when I was, financially, had access to lots of money, sister get laid off, and take care of her while she was, in between jobs, I was always helpful. And anybody know that I give my shirt off to my back to my loved ones, So I know, like, specifically my family, like what my mother has done and sacrificed for us, my brother, you know what I mean, up until last year he was, helping us monthly, So I owe a lot to my family, but I don't feel indebted because I do it for them too, in this process. But that's how us as black people do. Like, how many black people have lost everything because they make $100 million, but the people that we have to take care of so many people. You know what I'm saying? Because white kids, when they come into money, oftentimes, most of the time that I know about, like their parents is fine. So they don't have to, like, buy their mother a house. The mother got a nice house. You know what I'm saying? They come from, like, inheriting, businesses and things of that nature. And, for us, like, each generation, we're still learning and trying to figure out a way, and making mistakes along the way, So to see a black man able to take care of his family, as Mr. McGrowder did, provide opportunities, security. I mean, people, like, since I've been here, like, he's had the same employees at his bakery, whereas, the patty shop. He's the one that founded the patty shop. I forget what it's called. I think a Tree of Life patty shop or something. But everybody knows Dunbar River patty shop. So I have nothing but respect for him. And I'm starting to get a little emotional. I feel it in my stomach. You know what I'm saying? But I went through the process of mourning with my dead brother, Damiel Witch. It's crazy. To see, when I got the phone call, and then he came to see me, and, it's like the pain, you know what I'm saying? I never seen my brother like that, like, I don't know. I don't want to really describe it, but it was, I could say it was pain. You know what I mean? And I have a very close relationship with my father. Like, my father's my favorite person in the world. When my mother was here, it was my mother and father were my favorite people. But there's a special relationship with coming from, like a house with a good, solid, male, masculine foundation, I got an artist I work with, Slim, Iceberg Slim, and he, one thing I love about him is that he has a lot of pain that he, it comes across in his writing. But anyway, the reason why I say him now is that he didn't get raised with with a father, and to see him struggle, in areas that I have security in, it's I have empathy for his situation, because I know what my father had brought to me, and I couldn't even imagine like that disappearing, like not being there. You know what I mean? But going through the grieving process of seeing my brother, suffer, dealing with the situation with his dad, it was a powerful experience, and so I made sure that I was going to, be there for him. They had a lighting. That's the only thing I missed because I didn't hear about it. I get so involved in my work, you know what I mean, that it's like I just lost like contact within a few days, and I missed the lighting, But I told him, I said, "Yo, man, let me know everything was going on, but I want to be there." So anyway, about 2 weeks ago, they had the grave digging. So anybody who knows about, a Jamaican funeral, is, like I said before, one thing I love about Jamaica is they're self-sufficient, or I should say we self-sufficient now. Some cats say I'm a yardie now, you know what I mean? So anyway, we're self-sufficient, as black people, but specifically here in Jamaica, like black people in Jamaica have a different culture than black people who are descendants of slaves in America. Even though our brothers here descendants of slaves, it's just different. But our cultures is different because we were dominated by the Europeans. You know what I mean? So everything, like, we live the same style of life as the Europeans or the slave masters, the planters, except that it's on a lower level. You know what I'm saying? So we getting scraps. You know what I mean? But people in the Caribbean and stuff like, they don't even have the scraps. You understand what I'm saying? So being that we getting the scraps, we're maybe not at the table, but we're around the table. We're having a conversation. We're picking up the culture, and that's why black women in America look like white women. With the hair, all the makeup, and the sassiness and all that. Miniature Karens. You know what I mean? And here in Jamaica, like the role of a woman is completely different. But I'll get into that, later on in this episode. But even, with men, men in America, the black men in America, we move different. Like, masculinity is different from a, black, man born in America, as opposed to, someone coming from the Caribbean, and how we deal with women and stuff, like, you know what I mean? Because in the Caribbean, especially in Jamaica, there's a clear, defined role as a man and a woman. And in America, in the black community, especially nowadays, it's kind of not clear. You know what I mean? Like, a lot of women have the masculine energy, and a lot of men have the feminine energy. And we know this is by design, by the Willie Lynch, process. I don't want to, because I'll get into that. But dealing with the situation with the grave digging, Mr. McGrowder had a grave digging about 2 or 3 weeks ago now. it must have been 2 weeks ago, Sunday, and you know, here in Jamaica, people are more self-sufficient. More people work for themselves, that sort of thing. And the funeral is no different. Most people in America, they get a plot of land, burial plot, and their job is just to show up, with the body, and the grave is already dug, and then the pallbearers put it in place, and then they drop it in the ground, but here in Jamaica, it's a little different. The process is that the loved ones dig the grave, hence the word grave digging. So, I've been around, grave diggings, but like this was my first grave digging where it was like I was there from like down there to start, and then to the end, which was an all day thing. My skin is like was peeling because I got sunburned. It was crazy. But it was a powerful experience. Because by the time I got there, the grave was pretty much dug, and so they had the masons in there. So like 2 or 3 guys inside the dugout area for that the body would go in. And so now they had that all dug out, and then they're on the inside building a surrounding inside the dirt with cinder blocks, creating a tomb basically for the casket to go in. And these masons were all loved ones, who loved Mr. McGraw, and part of their family, and that's who does the grave digging, because everybody knows a mason out here. In Black America, we don't know, masons and carpenters and plumbers in our community, and we call, and they part of our, like here, and so it was a team effort. Like I said, it was about 3 brothers in the hole, dug out, building up a wall of cinder blocks, and then they had, with the cinder blocks, you need cement. So there was another team of brothers on the side that they were making the cement all day. It was, and then cats would come work for a couple hours, and somebody else would fill their shoes, and it was just a powerful event that I'll never forget. I expect to be cremated, like, within the nation of 5%. It's normal to be cremated, But I'll do a show on that, episode on that. But right now, I just want to build on the process, in dealing with death in Jamaica, and like I said, it was, guys in the pit. I was call it the pit, but I don't want to be disrespectful, so just where the body goes in, building a wall, cement makers, making the cement and sifting it, and doing their process, and don't want somebody throwing the water and the brother throwing the dirt, and like that's a whole specialty right there. It's just building it, making the cement. You know what I mean? And then the guys, come in, bringing the bags of cement, from the, the truck or whatever, where the supplies are, the rocks, dirt, water, like all of this had to be set up. There had to been, I would say, about 200 or 300 people at the grave digging, you know? And, you know, here in Jamaica, it's like whatever's going on, there's always somebody that's going to, like there's always going to be like a setup shop, pop-up shop, you know? And there was at least five pop-up shops, you know, there, like, you know, tent here, selling waters, beers, snacks, another one here, another one down the road, you know, speaker on top of the car, and playing music. You know me, I'm over here vibing and shit. It was amazing. You know, it was an amazing. And when I say amazing, I'm not like trying to be disrespectful as far as like, you know, it was like a happy, but you know, it was just like a celebration of life. It felt like, you know. And so I was just watching, you know what I mean. And then one of the guys, you know, once like the walls was built, and then they do the cement on the outside level, and it was like it was a process. It was an all-day process of building something special to put the body of their loved one, our loved one, in. You know what I mean? In his resting place. And so while this was going on, I noticed I was like, I started noticing that all of the plots that had bodies in them, they were all facing east, you know. So, and you know, I'm into, you know, the sciences and all of that, so I studied them. And so I was like, damn, they facing east first, because I know first his was. I said, I wonder if he was a Mason, because, you know, he faced, you know, his body. Then I looked around and I did the knowledge, and I said, yo, all of these, you know. So a roster, dear friend, was walking by. I said, yo, Rob. I said, yo, all of the bodies are facing east. I said, yo, is there significance for that? He said, yeah, you know, they face the morning star. You know? I said, yo, I know it, you know, because in Islam, Muslims pray facing east, right? So on a spiritual level, like anybody who deal with, you know, spirituality, mysticism, African or Black history, and all the Ma'at, or however you say it, is, you know, facing east is always very important, you know. And so what happens is, what he meant by the morning star is the sun, right? The morning star rises always in the east. So the beginning comes from the east, you know. And so I was like, wow, that's powerful, you know, because they're facing the rising sun, you know, the new beginning. You know, I just thought that was powerful. So, you know, so we spent the whole day, you know, and it was like, you know, we're in the rainy season right now, so it was like off and on, but the rain really didn't, you know, pose a problem. You know, nobody went home early because of the rain, you know. And, you know, my brother Daniel Richie was there to, you know, overseeing, you know, and he's a special brother. He's a leader, you know. Anybody I'll be around is going to be street smart, you know what I mean? So he's street smart, you know, he got a vibe, you know what I mean? And he, you know, he like a couple, you know what I mean? Like, he you know, he an OG, you know what I mean? Yeah, he's definitely a leader. And I mean, I've always dealt with leaders, you know what I mean? It's just the corny niggas and the competitive niggas that, you know, always have a problem with, because they want to challenge. They want to challenge, and I be telling them, your arms are too short to box with God. You know what I mean? I don't have no competition. You know what I mean? And it's not that I'm better or worse. I don't compete. You know what I mean? I'm here to be the best G-man of law that I can be. You know? I'm not trying to be Michael Jordan, LeBron James, or anybody. Even with my you know, the only person I have ever, you know, looked up to in life, Mr. Reed, you know, I had no interest in wanting to be like him. You know what I mean? It's just that, you know, I hold him in revere. You know what I mean? But I'm sure that in ways, I'm like him. You know what I mean? Because I'm an alpha. So it's like alpha is just a natural like order of things. Like you can't really you can learn leader qualities, but you're either an alpha or you're not. You know, and alphas usually don't have to compete. It's the young lion that might compete, but the whole alpha ain't got nobody to compete with. You know what I mean? He's the master of his surroundings. And but anyway, Mr. McGraw is definitely an alpha. Damian Richards is definitely an alpha. And I stayed there until it was time for him to leave. Even with the rain. You know what I mean? I left. You know what I mean? Walking out the cemetery in mud. You know what I mean? Stuck to my my slippers. You know what I mean? And I'll always remember that. I'll always remember that day. And that was probably about the third or fourth week after his death, or his resting place. And so what happens is that it takes about a month to bury a family member here, because they give it time for people to come from UK or US or other places, because everybody has family somewhere else here in Jamaica. You know what I mean? Like in America, like we move north, east, west, or south in America. You know what I mean? So we might go to Jersey and move down to Atlanta, or move to Atlanta to LA. But black people don't leave America. You know what I mean? Because we bought into the concept of not everybody, but a lot of us bought into the concept that it's the best, country in the world. And we're seeing every day that it's not. America is one of the most violent countries in the world. But I get back to these the grave digging. So now after the grave digging, there's a wake yard. Some people call it a dead yard, but the people that I deal with, they call it a wake yard. You know what I mean, or a live yard, because they're a life yard, because they're celebrating the life of the person. It's kind of like how Europeans say the Book of the Dead. You know what I mean? But the people who got knowledge of self, they call it the Book of the Awakening. It's kind of like that in my eye. But anyway, but so after that process of the grave digging and all of that, now the next week, the process is followed by the funeral. And like I said, like my mother became a Jehovah's Witness when I was about 6 years old. So and I left home, probably for good, like around 17. So that process, like that was my first religion. So it was the theology of the Jehovah's Witnesses. And so the witnesses, they don't go to funerals. They don't go to other people's church. I shouldn't say funerals. They do go to funerals, but they don't go to another church for a funeral. They don't enter a mosque. They have the reasons why, and I'm not even going to like express why, because like I said, I'm 56, so I've only dealt with that religion around 11. I'm for 11 years, 6 to 17. And by the time I left home, I was studying Islam. My friends were 5%ers or Nation of Islam. So it's been a long time. But I know that we didn't go to funerals. We didn't go. You know what I mean? Loved ones, our neighbors would pass, and we wouldn't go to the church. So I just got used to not going to the churches and all of that. You know what I'm saying? So we didn't, so I only went so once I got older, then I would started going. I went to my Uncle Willie's funeral, and was probably the first one on my father's side, and so we wouldn't go to funerals, so I really wasn't even familiar with the process, but it wasn't until my mom's passed that I understood about a repast and all of that, because these are the things that she dealt with, or we dealt with, for her burial. She was cremated, so at that time, like I would up until that time I would, like, pay respect to the person, my condolences and all of that, but we wouldn't like go to the person's church and repast and all of that, you know what I mean? Because like I said, they don't go into that thing. It wasn't until I got older, and I saw the importance of being there for loved ones when they pass, because when my mother passed, people who I thought would have been there for the funeral wasn't there, and I wasn't even gonna be there, because I didn't want to be around, niggas that, that who I didn't barely knew, and they crying on my shoulder, you know what I mean, I ain't gonna get into that because I don't want to be disrespectful to people, but I know that my cousin Corey was there, and like I said, he's my favorite cousin on my mother's side. I have to be careful of that, because I got family on my father's side that I love as much too. It's like my cousin Dre, Andre. He's an amazing producer and all of that, and he helped me get through the situation with my mother. He gave me some advice that I always give people that who lost their mom. He told me, you never get over it, bro, but it gets easier in time. And I caught myself saying that yesterday to Damiel Rich. I say, yo, you never get over it, bro, but it gets easier in time. And I could tell the way he responded that he heard that and felt that. But my cousin Corey, like I said, I wasn't gonna go to my mother's funeral, because I just thought, for one, I had to go to Kingdom Hall, which is the Jehovah's Witnesses religious building, and like I said, I wasn't really never close to my mother's side, because she came from Rochester, so we have to travel to see her. We didn't grow like up in town with all of our loved ones. Our cousins and stuff like that. You know what I mean? Like, we weren't one in the family that had a whole bunch of family. So we had cousins, but we were seeing like every once in a while. And but on my father's side, you know what I mean? Like his auntie lived right in the next town, so. We didn't grow up around them, but once I became 17, like, you know what I mean, they really embraced me. And, so, but when my mother passed, my cousin Cody, like, if he hadn't came, I don't know what I would have did, because, he was just dead, he's a Libra too, I think that's October 7th. If I'm not mistaken, which is the same birthday as the Honorable Elijah Muhammad. But if not, it's October 10th. But, I just know that I couldn't have been there, because, like, I love him so much that it was like when everybody else was hugging me, I was like, yeah, you know what I mean? Like, yeah, okay. I really don't even know you, you know what I mean? But, thank you, you know what I mean? And then everybody came to stay in my brother's, house where my mother was living, because my, mother, father, everybody, was in the house, and living together when she passed. So everybody from, all over Seattle, down south, up, upstate New York came, And like a lot of them wanted to do staying at my mother's house. You know what I mean? It was like we couldn't get no peace. You know what I'm saying? But fortunately the lights went out. You know what I'm saying? And everybody had to go to the hotel. We finally got some peace. But I just remember like for the first couple of weeks was like just hugging the pillow. Just hugging the pillow. You know? But the only person I allow myself to like even get emotional or cry with for was Kobe. You know what I mean? Like I was able to shed tears and share pain. You know what I mean? So I appreciate you, Kobe. I love you dearly, man. I still I still think back like yo, I couldn't have made it without you. You was my crutch, man. And I hope I can, I just love you, man. I appreciate you. And that's what I try to, that's the standard I try to be for, Damian Rich, because I know how important that was, you know what I mean, for me. So I tried to be there, as much as I could. And I could tell he appreciates it, you know what I'm saying? But, so, anyway, so we're at the funeral, and it's always like now that I go to funerals, and this is probably my second funeral in the last month. One of my neighbors passed too, sweet lady, Miss Woodbine. She lived to be about 96, 97 years old. And I love to hear the stories of, and my cousin Romina, when she passed, I went to her funeral in the church, you know what I mean? But like I said, I was 17, I was older, so, but, I love to hear like people talk about the person, you hear like, certain things that you didn't know, and, it's just, I get a lot out of it, me and my son went to Mr. McGrowder's funeral, and then we, like it was raining, so we're not far here in town. I took my son home, and then it was like I couldn't. I got fidgety. I said, I need to be at the burial because it was raining. It was raining off and on. You know what I mean? So it was like, but I took my son home, so he didn't have to be out in the rain, and something drew me to the, to the burial, and I went, was able to go to the cemetery and, caught the last process, and, by the time I got there, people were leaving, but he was buried, he was buried. I got to see the masons put the final touches on the, smoothing out the cement, and, hug my brother, what I mean, let him know I was there, and, then they had the repast afterwards. The repast was touching. But I didn't go to the repast. I'm not like a people person. And I was like, and the thing is, like, I wanted to be there for him, but I know that, all of his cousins and everything, like, they got him. You know what I mean? But I told him, so when I was, leaving, I was going down the street, and he seen me. He's like, yo, G, man, what's good? I said, yo. So he's like, yo, everything up there. I said, yo, I know, but you know how I'm at. You know what I mean? I'll catch you tomorrow. You know what I mean? And so that's what it is that, what I realized from losing my mother was that, the people is kind of backwards, because people don't really need you like the first week or two. You know what I mean? They mourning. They just want to be alone. I know. I mean, for me, you know what I'm saying? That's all I'm speaking for, because I'm sure people get it from, get stuff from that. But I know it was like afterwards, like the 2 weeks afterwards and the 3 months later and all of that. It's like, when you get the phone call and, yo, man, I just heard about your mom. I'm sorry to hear about it. That's when it, like, really touched me the most. You know what I mean? Like, during the process of the first 2 weeks, it was like people was in the way for me, And like I said, like, the lights went out. So everybody had to, like, leave my brother or my mother, my family's house. and go get the hotel. So when they got the hotel, it was like, all right, I was able to relax and, you know what I mean, and like mourn. You know what I'm saying? You know, but anyway, you know, I just wanted to share my experience on grave digging in the live yard. You know, live yard is, you know, people come together like the night before the funeral, and it's a big, you know, it's a big festival. You know, where it's like, you know, it's usually on the property of the, you know, homeowner. You know, the person, the yard that the person lived, and they, you know, they have like, you know, like I said, pop up shops, you know, and you know, for Mr. McGrowdy, it was probably about, there were at least five in the immediate surrounding, like two inside his yard, then, you know, three outside the gate. You know what I mean? Then there was some down that street, and then down that street, and people are coming. You know, music going. You know, DJs. You know what I mean? Like, DJ was lined up. There was one DJ, and then he's waiting to, you know, there's DJ behind him waiting to get on. You know what I mean? And it was, you know, music, and, you know what I mean? You know, rolling up, smoking, cats drinking. I don't drink, but I do smoke. But, and, you know, it was powerful, you know? It was powerful. You know, because you know, you got him on the mind, and you having a good time. Not a good time, but you know, enjoying yourself. You know what I'm saying? You know, I just love Jamaica. You know, and I'm gonna leave it there. You know.
P Funk City G.